Hello, this is Fiona Twycross. I'm a Labour London Assembly member and you're listening to Raw.
You're listening to Raw, 12:51 AM, bringing you your favourite shows 24/7.
You lot are locked into Tux Tuesdays.
You listen to the Daisy and Amy show.
This is Living Up the Weekend at 1 o'clock.
Hear the best new music.
You and your love for Taylor Swift. No, don't. That's gone out on air now.
Stay informed with Raw News Update.
Certainly we're one of the few universities in the country who get to sit on the University Senate.
Some people have viewed this protest as a reaction to one person, which can seem like a bit of a witch hunt. What would you say to those people?
Keep the score with our daily sports analysis.
They have dug deep. They have equalised. Warwick 6, Coventry 6.
Discover the best on-campus talent.
This is the show where we bring on creative writing homegrown at Warwick.
Sitting on a bridge, looking at a broken edge at the gap, too far to jump and the drop too far below.
And follow us as we go outside the studio.
I'm Lauren and I'm sitting with the beautiful Foxes. How are you doing? I'm well, thank you. How are you?
If you've been asleep, you have so missed out.
You're listening to Raw, 12:51 AM. This is your student radio station.
My name's Roger Helmer, UKIP MEP. I'm the party's spokesman on industry and energy. Speaking to you now on behalf of Raw.
Roger Helmer there from our EU Question Time the other week. Hello, welcome back. It has just gone past 3 o'clock. This is Perspectives every Tuesday from 3 o'clock till 4 o'clock, discussing all of the politics of the week with my very well-informed panel. On the panel this week, we have Barnaby Merrill. Barnaby, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Henry.
Good. Alistair, how are you?
I'm great.
And Will Copping, just to introduce Will, is our treasurer at Raw and also has a keen interest in politics. You study history, don't you, Will?
Yeah, I do indeed. I'm doing all right, Henry. Thanks for asking.
And talking of exec positions, the former editor of Bore Comment, Mike. Mike, how are you?
Excellent.
Right, now, let's get stuck in to the show. Just to let you know, anything we talk about today, have your say on it as well. If you're listening online, click the contact tab on the web player, or you can tweet us at Raw 12:51 AM or at Perspectives Raw, or you can ring us 0204 765 73077 if you want to have your say today. First, we're going to go to a Labour story, and I've got a couple of Labour people in the room and a couple of non-Labour people in the room. And a Labour frontbencher, who is also the opposition whip, Conor McGinn, has said that the Labour Party no longer represents the working class. Now, Barnaby, this is obviously a bit of a strange thing to say, being on the Labour frontbench. Do you agree with Conor?
I think it's been an issue that's been talked about for a while, actually, so almost since New Labour was a thing, in the side that Labour's now kind of more concerned with sort of middle-class, metropolitan people, and not so interested in the kind of traditional sort of manufacturing base that was their sort of traditional support up until the 1980s. So I don't think it's a surprising thing to say. I think it's surprising that he's come out and said it as a frontbencher.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, with Jeremy Corbyn's sort of London-focused kind of liberal leadership, I think it's certainly something that a lot of what we like to call proper Labour type people have started to bring up.
Alistair, do you think Labour has, lost that ability to represent the working class?
Yeah, I think Labour's sort of new constituency since the start of the Blair years is kind of a combination of that liberal middle class Guardian reading demographic and you're basically as well like a coalition of ethnic minorities. That tends to be the people who vote Labour in the largest numbers. However, I would say what we define as the traditional working class doesn't really exist anymore. So we really mean just the low paid in society, and they're not voting Labour. And I'd argue that's not quite the same thing as the working class.
Fair enough. And Will, as someone who is partial to a bit of Labour politics, do you think Labour represents the working class effectively?
I certainly think this is a discussion that needs to be had, but I think coming out and saying it as a frontbencher in the House magazine as he did, is probably not the best move for the party as a whole. And also the fact that he's kind of... I had a lot of issues with what he said and how he phrased it particularly. And the fact that this is a man from a Labour safe seat who's saying this. So he's just as guilty of this as Corbyn is, because he's making the exact same argument. Corbyn doesn't know what's going on with the rest of the country because he's in a Labour safe seat he's had for 30 years. This is the exact same thing here. So,
Mike, do we think this is Labour's biggest challenge then? Trying to get back this working class demographic, and do you think, in your opinion, they've lost that genuinely?
Well, yeah.
sorry, as a working class northerner,
there's a bug going around the studio by the sound of it.
Like, I am working class. I come from a working class background. My parents are working class, and neither of them, I don't think, have even voted, actually, never mind for Labour in the past several years, because Labour has lost its roots. It no longer concentrates on the issues that it previously did do which won voters. I think that UKIP is the party which will start winning working class votes, not necessarily because they represent those issues, but because, unlike Labour, they tend not to patronise their electorate. They just say what they think.
So if Labour do eventually lose this completely, this whole working class thing, because, I mean, I think you still do think, when you think of the working class, you instantly think Labour. I mean, I know UKIP have had a big effect, particularly up north, but I think, you look at places like Sunderland and it's always Labour, it's never going to change. Well, we assume it's not going to change. Who would we think? Do we think UKIP is really the only option that we could sort of say does represent the working class, or perceivably? I mean, Barnaby, could you imagine any other party other than Labour or UKIP sort of championing the working class votes? Because, do the Greens have it? Could the Lib Dems have it? Could the Tories even have it?
I think, honestly, the Conservatives would be the most likely. I mean, if you look at what happened in Scotland, I think at a time when Labour are seen as not really caring about kind of genuine, like, sort of economic issue, things like that, I mean, that's the perspective people have. I think if the Conservatives were to come in, as they have in the past, with a kind of, just general sort of steady hand on the tiller, we'll keep you safe, you'll have a job, you'll have enough money, that kind of thing. I certainly think that that's a very sort of attractive message to people who are feeling quite sort of vulnerable in their economic position, as many people in what we call the traditional working class certainly do.
Okay, Alistair, do you agree with this, with Barnaby?
I think UKIP are the only party positioned to take advantage of Labour's weakness in the north, in their heartlands. And this is because, I think, two reasons. One, UKIP is the only party which is basically not afraid of being openly patriotic. Labour's have had a big problem since 1997 in that they're always trying to distance themselves from any idea of patriotism, which I feel anyway, which certainly doesn't help their cause of the working class. Secondly, UKIP are going to address immigration in a way that the Labour leadership is now probably even further away from addressing it than it ever has been. And immigration is the number one or number two issue amongst working class voters statistically. And until you address that, you can't regain your credibility. I think the idea that they're always going to hold on to those heartlands, by the way, is a dangerous and complacent one for the Labour Party, because, who knows?
Copping, do you think we're being naive by suggesting that, a party of old Tory cronies, perhaps is the one that's actually going to challenge Labour to be the, championing working class?
I don't think you are, because right-wing populism has had has often taken votes from the left. Even though UKIP haven't done what other right-wing populist parties have done and stolen leftist rhetoric, they are certainly addressing concerns that are prevalent among the working class that Labour haven't addressed, but I would still argue Labour are a better representation of the working class than UKIP are or could be.
And Mike, what do you think of that?
I think the major issue is the one that was brought up earlier, is patriotism, is the fact that many people in these sort of working class backgrounds are incredibly patriotic, and they want that addressed or accepted, and then you get Labour MPs mocking people for having sort of Great Britain flags flying out of their window and stuff like that.
Yes, that was the famous Emily Thornberry tweet, I believe.
In the most patronising manner
in
possible.
A by-election that was threatened by UKIP. Talking of the Labour Party, and in particular Conor McGinn, he also said something this week in the same speech, that Labour's anti-nuclear weapons / deterrence stance would lose them votes. Obviously, there seems to be a weird dichotomy here in that Corbyn is anti-nuclear weapons, the PLP, Parliamentary Labour Party, seems to be quite pro having this deterrence, the Scottish Labour Party is, I don't know, anti or something, and then the Scottish leader of the Labour Party is pro, and it just seems like a mess. Will, do you agree with Conor McGinn that defence might not win you a lot of votes, but it can certainly lose you a lot of votes if you are not in the right place on it?
I would agree with that statement, but I don't agree with McGinn's position on this. I looked up his voting record, and he voted in favour, and this is what told me everything I kind of needed to know, essentially, about his defence policy. He voted in favour of Syria airstrikes, and that, I think, says a lot about his defence policy in particular, and how out of touch that is with certainly the Labour voting public.
Well, Barnaby's shaking his head there. Barnaby, what do you think of that?
I think there's a very big difference between people who want to maintain the kind of, whatever you think about Trident, there is a kind of safety element to it. And people who perhaps vote for this kind of neoconservative interventionist stuff, I think you'll find a big difference between people who vote. I mean, only 66 Labour MPs voted for Syria airstrikes. I think the number of Labour MPs who'd vote for Trident.
I thought it was about 70, but yeah.
66, something like that. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, the number of Labour MPs who'd vote in favour of renewing Trident, I think, is somewhat larger, and I don't think you can make that connection.
Alistair, do you think that, your average Johnny down the pub is going to be, oh, you know what, Labour are anti-nuclear weapons, I'm not voting for them?
It's one of a number of policies where they're going to struggle. I think, statistically speaking, the public as a whole are definitely in favour by at least a significant margin. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the
it seems that way, yeah.
I also think that Labour supporters, on the whole, are also in favour, possibly by not such a large margin, but most working-class Labour voters recognise the need for a nuclear deterrent. So I'm not sure how opposing that is going to aid their electoral cause, in all honesty.
Mike, is this really going to affect Labour's election result, do you think, honestly?
I genuinely don't. I don't think that this nuclear weapons policy is going to affect anybody other than Guardian and Telegraph readers. But I think the defence policy certainly would, and I think it's correct to say that what they decide to do with institutions like the British Army, which a lot of traditional voters are very proud of, will definitely affect sort of.
See, I think I've got to disagree with you on that one, Mike, because it sounds like minor, I think, at this point in the cycle, but when we get to 2019 and Linton Crosby is going after Labour's policy and saying Labour are going to make you unsafe, Labour are going to take away national defence, Labour are going to result, we're going to have like nuclear weapons being aimed at us and all that kind of thing. It's a massive avenue for attacking, I think, in that direction.
I just think that issues like the NHS and education are going to matter more in the next election than these sorts
Can I jump in quickly
yes,
on
of
that?
course,
Yeah,
Barnaby.
I mean, I think things like the NHS, things like that, are always things that Labour are going to have a lead on. And they Jack Straw and Robin Cook said at one point, why do Labour need a health policy? It's always better than the Tories. If you look at 1987, Neil Kinnock, who was very popular, then gave a car crash interview where he basically suggested that we'd have to fight a guerrilla war against the Soviet Union, and Labour went down to another heavy defeat. I think it does affect people, especially in very close elections, a lot more than you'd think.
Fair enough. And Will, do you think this is something that the Labour Party really needs to be getting involved in? Is it best to just say, do you know what, the public's in favour of it, whatever Corbyn thinks, let's just nip this in the bud, and whilst you might think it's a big waste of money, if it's going to lose us votes, there's no point?
I would argue it's less about the popularity of the policy and more about the divisions within them. I think that they should probably can the opposition to Trident, but more because it presents outward divisions in the party, and that is more damaging, I think, than the actual impact of having anti-nuclear deterrence as a policy.
Right, thank you very much for that, Will. When we come back, we will be talking about Shirley Williams saying that the EU debate is too dominated by men. Also coming up on the show, we have an interview with Professor A.C. Grayling, who is the well-known secularist, and we also have our infamous quiz, which is going to be better than ever this week.
My name's Mariam Namazi, and you're listening to Roar.
Shirley Williams, who a lot of you, I assume, on the show would know, is she was obviously one of the Gang of Four that formed the SDP, the Social Democrat Party, following their split from the Labour Party. She was with Roy Jenkins and, the other David Owen,
Bill
the
Rogers.
pro-Brexit, and Bill Rogers, that's the other one.
Everyone forgets Bill Rogers.
No, I gotta love Bill Rogers. He's still alive, isn't he? He's in his 90s, I think.
I honestly wouldn't know.
Yeah, he's in his early 90s. And she's obviously a Lib Dem peer until very recently. I mean, I think she resigned in January because she's getting on a bit now, old Shirley. But she has said that the EU referendum is too male-oriented. Do we agree with this? Barnaby, do you think when we watch an EU debate, it's just Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, Cameron Osborne, all the usual lot?
I think it's male-dominated to the extent that most of British politics is fairly male-dominated. It's right, it's a fairly dull kind of group of middle-aged men having a go at each other about fairly similar issues, the economy, immigration, etc., etc. And I think it does ignore the fact that there are some quite important women's issues in the EU, things like childcare, like maternity leave, stuff like that, which I haven't heard mentioned too much apart from sort of in the Labour Party.
Does it say, I'll open this up to everyone, does this say something that yesterday I know that Plaid Plaid Cymru, I think that's how you say it, with Leanne Wood, Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP, and Caroline Lucas from the Green Party, all formed together. I saw you actually tweeted about this, Barnaby, and had like a progressive sort of meeting about what the EU's done for maternity rights, paternity rights, and people's rights at work. But that was overshadowed by George Osborne coming out with another figure saying that we'd lose, I think it was 820,000 jobs or something. Alistair, do we think the women in this referendum aren't being listened to, or that it's not actually a case of gender, it's just a case of the elites?
I think, ultimately, I don't really care who is on each side of the debate.
Right.
It's about the ideas that are being put forward. You know, if it's 4 women discussing it, or 4 blokes, I just don't care.
Do you think that's the problem, though, that there are some good women, but because of that stigma, they're not being listened to? So I know, when you think of the EU referendum, I think the only few women that come to mind are Kate Hoey, who's obviously been involved in the Spectator debate, but she's fairly alone in her party on that issue. Nicola Sturgeon, obviously, but then the SNP used to be Eurosceptic, so is she, that pro-EU? A couple of others. Suzanne Evans, would she have had a bigger role in this referendum had she not have been suspended by UKIP? Will, do you think this whole referendum is too male-oriented? And do you think that's a bad thing?
It is, in the same sense that, as Barney said, in the same sense that politics in this country is. I wouldn't say it's necessarily worse off or better off than the rest of mainstream politics in this country. And I would argue that does need to change, because you can't accurately... it's about presenting... You need to present as much information as you can, essentially, in order to have the most fair, the most accurate election kind of possible. And you can't do that without a diverse number of people taking part and being visible in the movement.
Mike, do you think this is a problem that's specific to the EU referendum or just to politics?
Well, I do, to be honest. We do have several female leaders of parties who are heavily involved.
I mean, we are speaking as an all-white male panel.
Yeah, I was about to say,
admittedly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We have female leaders of political parties and stuff like that, and all we have at the moment for the EU debate is several really dull old white men talking about basically nothing. And frankly, I am incredibly bored of the EU debate right now, and just somebody new would be interesting on a pragmatic level.
Okay.
So you get more women involved and just... spice it up a bit.
Barnaby, do you agree that it's appalling, in Shirley Williams' words, that there was almost nothing from women?
I mean, obviously she's using that language to get a reaction. But I do think it's very important that, it's half of our population, and we've heard almost nothing from women or about women in this referendum. And I do think it's, well, not appalling, it's pretty depressing, to be quite honest, that we can still do this in 2016.
But Alistair, so you say now that it's not... You care about ideas, right? Not about, women or who's saying what, just as long as the ideas are right. But how are we going to address this if it just continues to be the men in politics? Do you agree that something desperately needs to be done?
I mean, to paraphrase Sammy Davis Jr., it could be a one-eyed black Jew telling me an idea. If the idea is valid, that's the bit I care about. I just don't... You have to understand, identity politics as a whole turns me off. The idea that what you say is more or less valid because of what you look like is something I find quite worrying as a trend in politics. So your response is always going to be, I don't care who's saying it, I care what's being said.
Well, do you think Alistair's being a bit naive and that this is a bigger issue than he's making out in politics?
It's not that... No one's saying that what people... certainly with regards to the EU referendum, with regards to issues that are specific to minority groups, there is that kind of a sentiment, and I do think it's valid in those cases. But in the EU referendum, it's not your ideas are more valid if you're a woman or your ideas are more valid if you're an ethnic minority. It's about having a diverse range of perspectives, which you don't get which you don't get from a group of white men from broadly the same social class talking about the same issue.
And Mike, do you think Alistair's being naive?
I mean, there's just no valid reason for women not to be involved in this debate. It's not even identity politics, it's just sheer stubbornness.
I'm not saying women shouldn't be involved in the debate. Let's just emphasise that.
I get
All
that,
I'm saying is, if... I don't know, obviously, how the internal processes of the Remain and Leave camps work. If they're deliberately excluding women from being in leadership positions, then that's wrong. It's discriminatory. But what I'm saying is, for me, it literally doesn't matter the identity of the individual presenting the ideas. It would be great if there was more women doing it. I can only assume that bar some kind of, malicious practice stopping them from stepping forward and talking about it, that they've chosen not to. And if they've chosen not to, that's really their doing. It's not, that's not something you could blame on any kind of external factor.
Barnaby, what do you think of that?
I mean, there are women. I mean, if you just peruse your Twitter feed, I see Yvette Cooper speaking about it. I see Sarah Willison speaking about it. I see Anna Soubry speaking about it. Whatever, but they're not publicised as much as the big guns. So it's not that they're making a choice not to these ideas. I do just feel that there is a sort of.
It seems the only one who's made a big comment was the Queen when it was alleged that she was pro
Brexit.
Pro Brexit.
UKIP Queenie. No, but yeah, I mean, I think I'm not saying it's like a deliberate malicious attempt, but I think there certainly is a culture in that the people at the top are listened to more, and they do sadly tend to be men. I mean, that's all. I think that's the main issue. There are women speaking about this. Seemingly quite visibly, but you don't hear much about it.
Right, okay. I mean, if the leaders of the campaigns are more listened to, that's kind of understandable. I mean, yes, the fact that the Remain side don't seem to have like an official kind of structure, but it's basically David Cameron and George Osborne, who are arguably the two most powerful men in the country. And on the other side, the Brexit camp have chosen Michael Gove and Boris, and then obviously the grassroots Leave have chosen Nigel Farage to be their figurehead.
Just him, yeah.
Now, those movements have chosen, their leaders, and it's not surprising that, therefore, if you're the leader of the official or one of the official Remain or Leave organisations, that you're going to be more listened to than anyone else talking about it. There's lots of men talking about. Daniel Hannan, I think, has the most clear ideas on any of these Conservative MEP, on any of these issues, and he's not really listened to in quite the same way as Boris, even though I think he's a far more knowledgeable and intelligent man. So it's something that cuts across gender divides, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Right, we've had another message in, or first message in rather, from Tim, who says, isn't it incredibly naive to assume the only reason women aren't represented is that they haven't chosen to speak up? Chosen as in inverted commas. We live in an inherently biased system. It's very easy to say you don't care what the identity of someone is, making a point as to... I've screwed that up. We live in an inherently biased society. It's very easy to say you don't care what the identity of someone making a point is when you're not a party affected by discrimination. Alistair, I would assume that was directed vaguely at you. What do you think of that?
I mean, I'm so diametrically opposed to that kind of sentiment that you're really not going to get any movement in my position. I just don't think, if you in any way self-describe as a liberal, I don't think you should be supporting the idea that some people have more or less valid opinions than others. It cuts against everything that is the foundation of that kind of area of politics, in my opinion.
And Jack Hadfield has said, who cares whether men and women lead it? I couldn't give a TOSS who's talking as long as they're pro-Brexit. So Jack, thank you very much for that. But touching on Tim's point, Will, do you think Tim's got a point that we don't really understand what it's like to not have our voices heard because we're not women or indeed in an ethnic group?
I would say that he certainly has got a point. I think perhaps we can forgive Tim's phrasing because he's been a bit, after his exams, he's been a bit... But,
Tim's had a bit of a rough day.
But I would agree with the broad swathe of the point, particularly that we do live in an inherently biased system, and that's a point just about equality of opportunity in general, not specific to the EU debate, but just something we don't want to get onto today.
Just before I come to you, Mike, we've had a couple of tweets in from people from the Boar, who I'm sure you'll be very aware of. Emma Johnson, who said, I really want to hear the opinions of women on the hashtag EUREF. Men have sound opinions, but women can bring new perspectives. Lizzie Pugsley, who is our editor of Perspectives magazine, has said, I think we need to consider that all of the topics that are discussed are, in capital letters, women's topics, and says, you mentioned things like maternity rights as women's policies. Why aren't workers' rights considered women's policies? And finally, Emma says, I'm choosing to talk about the EU referendum. Does that count at Perspectives Raw? Mike?
I think Tim's completely correct. It's not a question of validity of opinions. It's a question of getting people to speak who, in society, have a less of a chance to speak. It's about trying to give people a voice.
Do you agree with Emma and Lizzie then that it's things that are sort of it's sort of boiled down to women can talk about these things because they're specific to women, but don't try and talk about the economy or whatever or workers' rights because it's Barnaby. You seem to be agreeing with me on this point.
I mean, when I said earlier sort of there are women's issues, I didn't mean to say those are the only things women should be speaking about. In case I was misunderstood, but I think there also is a tendency, for women to only be speaking in the context of stuff relating to them, which they don't always do. But often, the fact that Shirley Williams has been publicised for saying there aren't any women in the debate, rather than probably many other pro-Remain comments she's made in the past, kind of shows the way that women appear to have been framed in this debate.
Sorry, this is society. Everything affects women. Every issue. There's not really any such thing as a women's and a man's issue because it's everybody's issues. Exactly. I'm sorry, people.
My name's James Berry, and you are listening to Raw.
Hi, I'm Rosina Robson, the Southwest candidate for the Lib Dems for the London Assembly, and you're listening to Raw.
Take these, and this applies to the EU.
Okay.
Take these chains from my heart and set me free. You've grown cold and no longer care for me. All my faith in you is gone, but the EU lingers on. Take these chains from our country and set me free.
The man, there seems to be a great deal of confusion.
He's got a great
with that
voice, actually.
in the studio. He does actually. That's
do an album.
Probably the only thing he does that is great. A couple of messages in. Jack Hadford says, if you really want to give a voice to the voiceless, you should be concentrating on giving more time to people who aren't members of the political elites. Thanks for that message, Jack. And also says, God, Henry, you be playing such a misogynistic song? I'm appalled. Other than the grammar there, Jack, which I'm appalled at. Thank you very much for the message. A couple more messages in. Lizzie and Emma seem to be very excited that their tweets have been read out on air. We've had a couple of messages in saying, one of them from Emma was saying, for when I'm birthing the male leaders of tomorrow, which I think is quite funny. Which is very good. And Lizzie
Emma, you can tell that to your girlfriend.
And then Lizzie says, Emma, our opinions on the radio in capital letters, hashtag started from the bottom. And it's Lizzie saying to Emma that you can only talk about politics if you're talking about maternity rights. And Emma says, we have come so far, hashtag peaked early. And before we move on to our next message, Jack has very swiftly messaged in to apologise for that typo. And Jack, I don't forgive you on this one occasion. Before we move on to our main topic, third topic, that was going to be affirmative action, I want to talk briefly, as Will reminded me then, the EDL marched in Coventry the other day, on Saturday, and I think I'm right in saying it was attended by about 175 people.
Depends on the estimates.
Depends on the estimates, yeah.
100 to 200, depending.
There's been if you talk to the EDL, there was 5,000, but there seems to be a large contingent of anti-EDL supporters there as well. I just want to ask the panel, the EDL, I mean, does this sort of failed march show they are completely irrelevant? Alistair, we spoke about the EDL on Freeze Peach on Saturday.
We did.
Saying, you were sort of arguing that you think Tommy Robinson as a person is misunderstood. Could you just give us a brief then of what you think about Tommy Robinson and why you think he's a bit underestimated?
Okay, so just address the EDL first, because that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
So basically the EDL, yes, like all right-wing street movements in Britain, is going into obscurity, but that's been a theme for the last 50 years, so I don't think that's horrendously surprising. Tommy Robinson, my thoughts on him, I was very much of the conventional position on him, which is he was basically a slightly sort of unpleasant racist. And then I kind of watched some of his talks, for instance, at the Oxford Union, and listening to kind of, how things were in Luton when he was growing up, you kind of get a window into a world where a guy can appear kind of very angry and very confrontational, but actually, he does have the odd valid point. And I think he left his movement when he felt that it had been infiltrated by the kind of people that tend to infiltrate those kind of movements. And in all honesty, Majid Nawaz, if Tommy Robinson is he thinks redeemable in his eyes, he is in my eyes, because I think Majid Nawaz is one of the most important Muslim speakers that we have in Britain today.
Mike, do you have anything to say about that in particular? Do you think the EDL are irrelevant? And do you think Tommy Robinson was misunderstood? I mean, one of the debates we were having on Free Speech, just to shout out Jack, who said if you want to hear more about the EDL, listen to Free Speech on Saturdays at 2. And then he says daily reminder that Tommy Robinson is not a racist. That's your opinion, Jack. You're entitled to it, as is Alistair and all my panel. But so on that, do you think that the EDL is insignificant now? And do you think Tommy Robinson's been misunderstood? I mean, he obviously was leader when a lot of questionable things happened. Can he really distance himself from an organisation like that?
I mean, first of all, I don't think the EDL is insignificant, because I think any organisation that exists like that is significant just by right of its existence. So, and I think that they will always have members and people willing to join because it's something which attracts people. It's the right-wing populism that we talked about earlier. As for Tommy Robinson, I'm not that educated on him, but I mean, my vague impressions of him are that he is an arse and that he's a racist, and I will probably stick by that.
Fair enough. And Will Copping, your opinions on the EDL?
Absolutely no tolerance for the EDL. Not in a ban them from speaking manner, but in a direct action opposition manner. Grassroots anti-fascist movements did that in Coventry on Saturday and in Leicester with Britain First. Tommy Robinson may have tried to redeem himself in the public's eyes with leaving the EDL and then the documentary he did with Channel 4, etc. Just the other day, he tweeted something that said, "Immigration is white genocide." That is literally what he tweeted. He later deleted the tweet, but he retweeted that in response to something Owen Jones said, I think.
Right.
No. Did you see it?
I didn't actually see it, but I do remember hearing something about the tweet, yes.
Yes, it wasn't Owen Jones now, I think. I can't remember who it was, but it was in response to someone, and he tweeted that. And that, in my mind, shows that he's not changed, and if anything, he's gotten worse, because now he's actually stealing white nationalist rhetoric. And
I'll give the last word on this to Barnaby, and just to let you know, Jack has said that no one really cares about the EDL now. Its numbers are shrinking, but it doesn't mean that the anti-Islamic movement is insignificant, because obviously groups like Britain First are increasing in popularity. Barnaby, do you think the supporters have just gone elsewhere?
Yeah, I suppose you could say...
Pegida, yes.
Yeah, Pegida, yeah. I mean, Tommy Robinson's involved in that in the UK, isn't he? Yeah.
I started off in Germany, I believe.
Yes, it did, yeah. I think, there's certainly a more concentration. I think groups like the EDL Britain First are more or less just typecast as thugs, for better or worse, whereas I think the Pegida movement has more of a kind of a political message of... I mean, Tommy Robinson makes a difference. He says there's Islam the mob and Islam the religion, and they're kind of opposing what they call Islam the mob, which I think is a kind of area of nuance that I think would allow them to be more kind of accepted in sort of polite society.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Barnaby. Sorry to cut you short there, but now we will move on to the job that is only open for anyone who is non-white.
My name's Toby Young, and you're listening to Perspectives.
So essentially, the LBC reported this, which is the radio station in London, were infuriated callers by telling them about this advert for a BBC job that is only open to nationals from, quote, a black, Asian or non-white ethnic minority. This is otherwise known as a sort of form of affirmative action to making sure that ethnic minorities are put into positions where they are discriminated against effectively in terms of numbers. Alistair, I imagine you have strong opinions on affirmative action. Do you think that this sort of reverse discrimination on on people who are non-white is the right way to go about getting more Asians and blacks in the workplace?
No.
You don't? So
no,
is your argument, where does this stop? So in terms of women and people with disabilities, or just in terms of I'm not for affirmative action anyway?
No, I'm not in favour of it. It's bad for, I think, a few reasons. One is it generates huge amounts of resentment. Like anything, where you assign a role to someone based on a predetermined factor and not on a performance factor, it's going to generate resentment. It's the same. It's as much as rightfully resentment would be generated as if I just said, well, I'll give a job to a man because he's a man, right? That's right, I think. Second problem with it is it's not necessarily efficient in getting the right people into the right jobs. Again, because you're simply doing it on identity grounds and not on skill-based grounds. And finally, it's incredibly patronising to ethnic minorities to say, oh yeah, that's right, yeah, you can achieve things, but it's only with our help. We have to put you into that position. I disagree with it on every level.
Whilst Mike is breaking his pen rather, Will, do you think there should ever be a job description that excludes certain people?
I think this is quite interesting because there's been lots of talk of it going on behind the scenes for a while. This is the first I've personally heard of something, certainly in an official capacity, advertising it so blatantly, which is arguably more honest than just doing it at the interview stage, as it were. But I think it's trying to address a problem without addressing the root cause of the problem.
So it's temporary in a way,
it doesn't actually solve the causes of the problem. It just kind of tries. It's like a half measure essentially, because it doesn't come from the right place, I think.
Mike, who are you on side with, Alistair or Will on this particular issue? Or are you in the middle? You going to triangulate and place yourself in the middle?
I'm not necessarily in the middle. I'm
just for anyone revising for Intro to Politics. That's when politicians take one thing and give the opposite dichotomy and then place themselves in the middle. Sorry about that.
That's completely fine. Just interrupt me. I don't necessarily agree with either of them. I just think it's not really that much of an issue. I mean,
you don't think so?
No, not really. Because you were saying about resentment. People are going to have resentment anyway because somebody isn't going to get a job. That's going to cause resentment in the first place. And secondly, you were saying that they may not be suitable for the job. That's one of the arguments against this sort of thing. But if there's a job application process, then the people who are applying are probably going to have those qualifications. Because if not, they're idiots. It's just the way it works. I just don't think it's really that much of an issue, and it's good for people who are from a background which is oppressed.
Alistair, I'll give you a chance to respond to that just before we go to Barnaby. Do you think it is really a force for good and that what we're all complaining about?
No, I mean, because you say that it'll just generate no more resentment, but in reality, people expect, in a liberal society, that everything is based on meritocratic principles, i.e. if you show better skills, better engagement with the task, whatever it is, you're more likely to succeed and get the job. And I think you've got far more resentment if people essentially know that it's either A, to literally they're stopped from applying completely, which is what's happened in this case, or alternatively that they've gone to the application process, but really it was predetermined anyway by the fact that they're not from an ethnic minority. It will generate more resentment. I don't like the direction that goes down. I don't like the direction that goes down at all.
Barnaby, what do you think about affirmative action and this particular issue with the BBC, which is obviously a public, an organisation that is in the public eye at the minute, as it is? Do you think they should really be excluding certain backgrounds, or is it necessary?
I mean, I think the way they've done it is a little bit ham-fisted and is likely to create a sort of backlash. But I think in principle it's the right sort of idea. I think if you look at just sort of sociologically, interviewers will always pick, generally, candidates that most resemble them. And we do live in a world where, for the most part, white people of a certain socioeconomic background are in positions of power, and they will choose people who most resemble them. By taking that option away from them, while it's not liberal, I agree, it's not liberal, sometimes if you do that, you then put people from different backgrounds, who I'm sure are qualified, in positions where they can then add a new perspective to the future hiring practices, where eventually you end up with a more kind of balanced workforce.
So you argue they had something different and perhaps light it up in a way. And speaking of light it up, here is Major Lazer with Light It Up.
My name is Mike O'Brien, former Minister in the Labour Government, Foreign Affairs, Trade and other things, and you are listening to Raw.
Barnaby had his fist up there. He loves a bit of Mike O'Brien by the sound of it. He was very impressive, actually, on the EU Question Time debate. We've got a message in from Alexi, who says, #EUREF has had near exclusively male coverage so far, it seems. Good on addressing that with some questionable fist pumps in the air, Alexi. I'd recommend divulging into exactly what those kind of fist bumps mean, unless it was meant for sarcasm, but nonetheless, thank you very much for messaging in. And if anyone else would like to message in, just click the contact tab on the web player, tweet us at Raw1251 AM, or you can tweet at Perspectives Raw, or give us a call on 024 765 73077. Now it is time for the infamous quiz, which I'm sure you're all looking forward to. This is going to be intense. So, the team on the left-hand side is the Labour UKIP coalition, which is going to be the Social Democrat UKIP coalition, and
I haven't left just yet.
And then here, the northern powerhouse that is Mike Wrench, and Will Copping on the left.
The Stocks, remember.
On the left of
Neither of
Barnaby.
those two was right.
What do you mean neither of those two is right?
He's not...
He's a social democrat.
At heart, yes. But
I'm sorry, Alistair, I meant libertarian.
Thank you.
Same thing.
It's not the same thing.
Right,
God.
now it's time for the quiz. Alistair and Barnaby, your buzzer is going to be Gordon Brun. And you have to say it like that, and you can, or Barnaby can say it when you have the answer
Barnaby's got the voice.
to a question. And Will and Mike, yours is going to be, we can't stop immigration whilst we're in the EU. So that is your...
Their buzzer is significantly longer than ours.
Well, no, but as long as you start it... as long as you start it, that will be fine. So our first question that I will open up is, which political party... became an electronic laughingstock this week after sending out emails to potential voters addressing
them... We can't stop
them...
immigration if we are still in the EU. It's the Labour Party.
And what did they famously do?
They sent loads of emails, really sort of personal, beautifully sent emails addressed to first name, which was... It was great for all the Labour members who, they're idiots anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And now, our second question is, which high-profile MP had to resign this week as deputy leader of a major party in Westminster? 1 point for what party it was that the deputy leader resigned, and another point for the MP.
EU immigration.
Yep. Mike?
I believe it was SNP.
It was the SNP, and who was the MP?
I cannot remember because they all merge into one sort of super Nicola Sturgeon to me.
It was Stuart Hosey.
Angus McHaggis.
No, he wasn't elected. Unfortunately, he was one of the three that wasn't. Right, moving on to question 3. Which famous rapper? What did famous rapper Stormzy say this week? Did he say Nigel Farage is not my man?
Gordon
Tim Farron. Barnaby Merrill.
Jeremy Corbyn is my man.
He did indeed. My other options were going to be George Galloway is my man, Tim Farron is no one's man, Nigel Farage is not my man, or Jeremy Corbyn is
Tim Farron is indeed no one's man.
Meanwhile, Skepta asked Nigel Farage to stop telling people he was his cousin.
Right, number 4. Bar Rizza in Birmingham is under intense scrutiny after their actions on Saturday. What did they do?
Vaguely heard about this.
Would we like to find out? Your options are: did they refuse to serve Kate Hoey as she wants to leave the EU and they want to stay? Were they caught letting people smoke tobacco inside the bar, or did they host the EDL for drinks after their protest?
We can't stop immigration if we're in the EU. I'm going to guess the tobacco inside because the EDL weren't in Birmingham, and I don't think it was the other one.
Unfortunately not. I'll open it up to the other team.
You're the weaker team member.
Gordon Brown. I just like saying it. Was it Kate Hoey?
Unfortunately not. They hosted the EDL for drinks after their demonstration in Coventry. And there's now a load of questions being asked as to whether they should have given the money made by them to charity. But that is a story for another day. What did Neil Hamilton say to Nigel Farage this week? Did he say, you were going to lose us the EU referendum if you are basically representing our side against David Cameron? Did he say, you should be called Kim Jong-Nige? Did he say, you look older than I do? Or did he say, UKIP needs to attract more left-wing voters and this can't be done while you're a leader?
Immigration? I think he said, you look older than I do.
Unfortunately not. I'll open it up to the other team.
Gordon Brown.
It's got to be the left-wing voters.
I think he said the thing about left-wing voters.
He actually said we should call Nigel Farage Kim Jong-Nige.
No way.
He genuinely said it on a radio interview. Final couple of questions. What did Boris Johnson say to a student this week at a rally?
Gordon Brown.
Barnaby Merrill.
Please don't waste that egg.
Yes, I'll give you that. I was going to, the answers were going to be, what did Boris Johnson say to a student who was going to throw, I'll give you a correct answer for that, who was going to throw an egg at him at Vote Leave rally? Number 1, I'm allergic to eggs. Number 2, thank God it's not a bacon sandwich, though I'd probably stomach it better than Miliband. Number 3, why waste an egg when people are starving, which is effectively what you said. Or when we leave the EU, eggs will actually be cheaper, so if you want to throw it, do it then. And our final question, before we go to our Professor A.C. Grayling interview, is... which UK party leader got engaged this week?
Immigration?
Yes.
I actually can't remember her name. Oh my God. The leader of Conservative Scottish Party.
Oh, Ruth.
I'll give you that.
Ruth Davison.
Ruth Davison.
Yes.
Correct. She got
Scottish
engaged
Party.
this week. And I think she's actually one of the few... gay party leaders in the UK at the minute, which is very interesting indeed. And finally, I'll give you one more. I'll give you a bonus question. Which of these Perspectives interviews has reached over 10,000 views? Toby Young, George Galloway, Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Furness, or Antic Love?
Ankit Love.
Ankit Love, indeed.
Future MP for Tooting.
Ankit Love is standing in the Tooting by-election. Thank you very much, everyone, this week for coming on the show. Thanks to Barnaby, Alistair, Will, and Mike. I'm afraid I'm going to have to give it to them, although congratulations on the bonus question.
Thanks.
Well done to you can't stop immigration whilst you're in the EU, and condolences to Gordon Brun on this particular occasion. We've got now coming up an interview, a very brief interview with Professor A.C. Grayling. But until now, we'll see you next week, and thank you very much for the messages in. And I'm joined now by Professor A.C. Grayling, who's speaking tonight at the Warwick debate on freedom of speech within universities. Can you tell us what your position is on no platforming a speaker?
Well, I said right at the outset of the evening that I think universities should be safe spaces for free speech. I think no platforming, trigger warnings, safe spaces within the university, from challenges to ideas and to viewpoints. I think that's wrong. A university is a place where there should be very robust, open discussion. And when there's bad free speech used in a university setting, it should be answered with good and better free speech again. This is the only way that we can make any kind of progress in our understanding of ourselves and the world. It's a really key issue.
And under any circumstances, when do you think a speaker should be blocked from speaking?
Only in the very rare circumstances where there's actual incitement to violence or incitement to discrimination against people who have disability or whose sex or sexuality or age is at issue. These are things that people can't make choices about, and therefore it is deeply unfair to them to be exposed to discriminatory speech. Everything else, however, is fair game. Because, after all, debate is about ideas. I mean, ordinary common courtesy and friendliness to our fellows in the human story should make us treat individual human beings with respect if they deserve it. But the ideas that people hold, the ideologies, the belief systems, these should be open to the harshest, the most vigorous scrutiny.
And just finally, have you enjoyed your trip to Warwick?
I always enjoy my trips to Warwick. I like it here very much. My name's Professor A.C. Grayling, and you're listening to Raw.